here, Pastor Robert Correa, I need you to be praying for his family. His sister passed away this last week. I've had many years of interaction with her over the years. Tragic life and passing, and we're praying for his family that God would help them. So I've asked him to minister this morning, and he'll be preaching in our service tonight. I want to read one scripture to you today. This is 1 Corinthians 14, verse 8. It's a little bit out of context the way I want to use it today. This is in the context of talking about tongues, the gifts of the Spirit. But he makes this statement, "For if the trumpet makes an uncertain sound, who will prepare for battle?" So we know that battles cannot be engaged unless you prepare for them. The whole objective of having a military is that that military is ready. You could spend 25 years in the military and never fire a shot and never step onto a battlefield, but should it happen, you've been trained and you're prepared and ready. The worst thing is to be caught off guard when you come under attack. And so I was thinking about that quite a bit over this last week, and it relates to what I'm going to preach at conference and this morning, as a matter of fact. But the whole idea of preparation, that all of you men are just doing that. You are preparing for battle. Whatever God has for your life in the future, right now is preparation. That's what our Serious Men's class is all about. That's what all of our ministry is all about. While we minister to single mothers and we preach on marriage and we challenge people financially, part of my responsibility is to prepare you for battle, for what lies ahead. Some of you are called to preach. Some of you will be pillars in this congregation. You'll be leaders here, being an example and being influential. But nevertheless, now you are preparing for whatever God has for you in the days ahead and in the future. There'll be battles, there'll be challenges, there'll be trials, there'll be difficulties, there'll be individuals that God will assign you to help and minister to. And so I want you to ponder that with me this morning. And what I've asked Robert to do, we're going to engage in a little bit of question and answer. Perhaps you can come and begin today by making some comments about the subject of preparation, what you did to prepare while you were a disciple here, maybe some of the mistakes you make. So I'm going to ask you about that this morning, and some of the things that you're doing now to prepare for what God has for you. Pastor Correa is not finished with his calling. There's no telling what God has for him. He's pastoring a good, strong church in Houston today, with finances, with disciples, with effective evangelistic ministry. But he knows he hasn't arrived, and there may very well be in his future the greatest of all challenges and sacrifices waiting for him. So Robert got sent out in about 2004? Yeah, I think that's what I was going to say. 2004. So he has quite a bit of experience. He's pioneered. He has been a missionary in Chile and now pastoring in Houston. So let's just welcome him to come. And in this way that we're going to do the ministry this morning, it is not a sermon per se, but you need to look for things that are spoken today that are going to challenge your heart and inspire you to maybe make some changes in how you're going about preparing for the future. Because preparation, depending on what the challenge is intense. Military, when you're getting ready for battle, I just reread a great book that I love called The Victors by Stephen Ambrose. It's the story of the run-up to D-Day, how General Eisenhower prepared and trained the troops. It was many years in the preparation, getting all the soldiers ready. 156,000 troops landed on the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944. And that wasn't just thrown together the day before. It was years and years of preparation. There was specialized equipment and weapons that were created just for that task. And man, remain ready for that. So that's what I want you to ponder today. Let's have Pastor Robert come. You just open it.
Amen. So that topic in mind, when you think about preparation, one of the things you have to always keep in mind is that they begin with certain convictions that you have in life. You know, I was having a conversation with George Ponce just a few days ago. When I got saved, one of the things, the first commitment I made in my life, the first conviction I developed in my life was that if the church doors were open, that I would be in church. I don't mean just physically be in church, but that I would commit myself to being part of the church and being involved in the church and doing whatever the church was doing. And so little did I know that decision, or when I made that choice in my life, that would establish a very firm foundation or platform for everything else. Because if you're faithful to one thing, and you can start being faithful to, for example, being faithful to church and being in church, and not skipping out, but coming to church on a regular basis faithfully, that establishes a very, very, very solid foundation from where you can build upon. And then you commit yourself to being in prayer. You commit yourself to reading your Bible. And these are commitments that you make throughout your life, and they start with a solid foundation. And so ultimately, a lot of it I attributed to that. When I first got saved, and some of the things that you do in life, you don't know that how they're going to play out in the future for you, right? You know that it's right to do certain things, and you know that that's the proper thing to do. You realize how much that's going to really help you in the future, or be an advantage to you. And I mean that in every aspect. In my marriage, certain things that I've established in my marriage that, for example, something as simple as never cussing my wife out, or never saying a word that was learning to use words, not saying something out of place, right? You try to remember that every word at one point or another is going to come back to haunt you. So I thought to myself, I'm going to try that in my marriage and in my home, not to use words that I'm going to regret, right? That I'm going to have to take back. And that throughout the years has helped me out a lot, because I've not had to go back and apologize to my wife, or deal with issues with my children, of things that in the past I've said or put into their lives that they shouldn't have been. That I was very careful in the words. So there are different aspects of life. So, as far as pastoring is concerned, you make an early decision to pastor when you feel the calling to preach the gospel. One of the things that you begin to do is you begin to set yourself to pastor, right? You begin to set your life towards that direction. And I believe that one of the first things that we did when we were younger is try to get out of debt, not get into debt. Because we believed that if we wanted to pastor, we needed to be debt free, we needed to be ready, we needed to be able to pick up and go at any time. We had to be committed and willing to just answer God's call to preach the gospel. And so,
okay, so going back to when you were still in the mother church here, what were some of the mistakes that you made as a disciple before you got sent out? Maybe a better way to phrase it is, what if you had it to do over again, let's say, what would you change about how you were functioning here in the mother church?
I believe that one of the things that happened, and I think it happened with me early on, or when I got married, I thought that you view yourself sometimes in a different light than most people view you, right? And I thought I was ready to get sent out the minute I got married. I remember I was just waiting to get married to get sent out. And so when I got married, I was expecting Pastor, at that time, Pastor Lamb and then Pastor Stevens, when he took over, to send me out right away. And so I was, the first few months started getting frustrated because they're not seeing my greatness. And I needed to be sent out. And so I got real frustrated with Pastor, and then, you know, after a year, I'm telling him, why aren't you sending me out? My marriage was not in a position for me to get sent out, to be honest. You know, I've had people in my church, they'll come to me and say, Pastor, you know, I'm doing good. And then you talk to the wife, it's like, oh, the life is falling apart. Marriage is in trouble, you know, and the reality, that was me. I was in denial of what was happening. Now, I viewed myself as everything was going great. The reality is that, you know, there were some things that needed to be worked out that can be worked out in church. And so what happened is, because I wasn't getting sent out, things happened in my life financially. And I ended up getting a job with GE, and I began to travel. Although I was still always going to church, and I was still involved, I was not in a position to be a disciple. I wasn't serving as a disciple. I was so engulfed in making money, and at that time I started making very good money, incredible money for a person like me. And so that became something that I was comfortable with, and I would always justify it with, you know, I'm gonna pay off my debt. I'm gonna, you know, be able to have some money when I go out. And so I got so involved in that pretty soon I was no longer a disciple. Pretty soon I was now consumed with my own materialism and you know, having things rather than doing the will of God.
Okay, very good. I like that idea that you said about we view ourselves differently than how others view us. And so how others view us is probably more important than how you view yourself. Right? So that's good. All right, what were some of the things that you did right, you feel you did right in the run-up to getting sent out?
Well, I believe that one of the main things that I do believe, I had a conviction about outreach. I had a conviction about tithing, giving. I had a conviction about getting out of debt. I was dead set on paying off all my debts. I was dead set on making sure that I was involved in you know, preparing myself, reading my Bible, praying. Right before I got sent out, to the certain degree that we would have fellowships with people from church, different folks, and all our conversations eventually became charged towards, you know, getting sent out. And that's when I came to the realization that I was wasting my time doing what I was doing. And so I made a decision that I was going to quit my job and take a lesser paying job so that I would be available to church and to be available to do the will of God and be available to prepare myself to get sent out. And so I quit my job. And I remember at the time I started working, and I was working for Sergio at the time at a computer store. He had making a third of what I was making before, you know, but I was able to be more available, shall I say, to do what I needed to do before getting sent out.
Okay. What were some of the first year mistakes that you made when you got sent out? If you can remember back, you first got out, building, you're starting to pioneer. What are some of the first year mistakes? And I want that in the context of maybe helping some of us avoid some of those when we get sent out.
Yeah, I think that I would say the first few, about 9 months, I got so engulfed in pioneering that, you know, the things that you do to try to maintain your marriage before getting sent out, you know, to try to stabilize your marriage. Then you get sent out, you get so engulfed in pioneering, you neglect your marriage, you neglect your home, and you have to be able to keep a good control or balance in your home and in pioneering. You have to go to prayer. You have to go to outreach. You have to follow up. You have to spend time with people. You also have to remember that you have a wife that is with you, and so you have to be very communicative with that. And if you know, I would say the early part is my marriage, and the other part is I would say that probably not asking enough questions. You know, sometimes what happens is we don't want to ask because we don't want to appear to not know. And so, and sometimes we ask way too many questions, right? But to be honest, it's better not to isolate yourself than because it gets you in trouble. And so I remember early on, I was kind of doing things on my own, and I finally realized I wasn't getting anywhere. I started calling some people and just talking. Pastor Stevens, he would come up sometimes, we'd have dinner, and we'd spend time having questions, and I'd ask him a ton of questions, as dumb as they might sound, and that really helped me out a lot. So I would say, not isolating yourself. I think I spin my wheels for the first 5 months because I was afraid to ask.
All right, and then you've kind of answered some of these, but maybe there's a little bit more. What major adjustments, or any adjustments, what adjustments did you need to make once the reality of ministry set in and you're in this atmosphere of pioneering, the schedule that you described? What kind of, I think some of it will be related to your family, and you can restate that. But what adjustments did you need to make once the reality of ministry started playing out in your life?
Well, right early on, I would say a year before we got sent out, like I said, I took a lesser paying job a few months running up towards I was getting sent out. We decided to sell our house. We were spending a lot of money on we had just bought a home. We'd been in that home for about 3 years. We decided we're going to put our home up in the market to sell. We were going to start downsizing our lifestyle. We thought to ourselves, the best way for us to be available to preach is to be living within our means and being available to preach. So we adjusted our financial lifestyle. The other thing that I believe that we started doing, my wife and I, we made a commitment to being in prayer and being in outreach. And so we started, my wife and I, making it to prayer, making it to outreach on a faithful basis. When we got sent out, believe it or not, the commitments we made as far as outreach and prayer is really what kept us going the first few years. Because to be honest with you, pioneering is all about doing what you've learned in the mother church. Waking up every morning, going to prayer at 7. If you don't do it here, you're not going to do it there. If you don't have a commitment, if you don't have a conviction about doing it, you're not going to do it. You wake up and go to prayer. You wake up and go to outreach. Even when nobody shows up, it's just you. And your wife doesn't even want to go. You get up and you go to outreach. You go knocking on doors. And so you begin to adjust your thinking. And it's no longer about, about what everyone else is doing. Really, it's about the calling and about being able to know that God is going to do something with the seeds that you're planting, and you're so focused on just simply doing the will of God, not for any other reward other than because you've committed to doing it.
Yeah. And what would you say about, we're using the word pioneering. I'm using the word pioneering a lot, and a lot of men don't grasp what that means. In terms of hard work, you're blazing a trail through the forest where there isn't one. You're having to build a house where there wasn't any, and you're having to establish something. So this will be the final thing that I'll have for you, and then we can open it up for other men to ask you questions. But just describe the dynamics, a few of the dynamics of pioneering a church, trying to establish a work of God where there wasn't one before in whatever area you've done that now in Las Cruces, in Chile, so you've got some experience in that realm.
I'm going to relate more to Chile because in Santiago, really, there was nothing. There's nothing. When we arrived in Chile, to be honest, we were like in a completely foreign culture. Even though I spoke Spanish, they spoke Spanish. It was not the same, right? And listen, there are many places when you go and you're going to go pioneer places, people have no clue of what you're saying, what you're talking about. And so pioneering, really what it is that you're coming to a place where you're going to establish something that they are not familiar with. They might have heard, they might have some semblance of things. Listen, you're going to be what they're going to look upon, and they're going to begin to use you as a reference point. And then you're going to begin to try to instill in them some of the things that you've learned throughout the years. And in many cases, I've been saved 12, 14, 15 years by the time I got to Chile. Right, 15, 16 years I've been saved by the time I got to Chile. So imagine, you're trying to teach somebody something you've learned in 15 years. And the problem with pioneering sometimes is that you want to build something immediately, and it doesn't work that way. So when we got to Chile, we had to learn to work with people, instilling in them basic principles one at a time. Teaching them faithfulness to church, for example. What you and I imagine as something that should be normal, like even coming to church every Sunday, just Sunday, once on Sunday. It was foreign to them. They would come whenever they felt like it, right? If they woke up one morning and they would feel like coming to church, they would come. And if they didn't feel like next Sunday they should come, they wouldn't come. And so just to establish a habit or a pattern, literally your building is like that scripture that says line upon line, precept upon precept. Little by little, you're establishing something. And so when we got to Chile, it really was a challenge because we had to teach this to people. I remember right before we left, I was there 6 years. And I'd spent the latter part of 5 years with one guy named Jaime. And right before I left, he finally said, I get it now. 5 years later, and this is a guy who I would, we would go outreach together. I would spend a lot of time together with him, right? And it took all that time, and it wasn't until I finally left that he said, I finally get it. He's still in the church now. He's one of the disciples in the church. But it takes time to instill in people, to teach them about prayer, the value of prayer, the value of prayer, the value of faithfulness, the value, of the things that you and I have learned that has taken sometimes years to learn, right? And so you really are blazing a trail by establishing just basic principles. And you think about the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, I always say this because when you read a Levitical law, you read all these other things. God was establishing principles that didn't play out and we didn't fully understand until we got to the New Covenant, the New Testament. Principles of tithing, principles of first fruits. These are things that, at first I think the children of Israel were like, okay, we'll go along with it. And eventually it became very clear. To us, it's clear now, right? We hear preaching, and to us, we understand all these things. But listen, it was a principle upon principle that God, I believe, was doing and teaching throughout the scriptures. And for us, I think that's what it is as pioneers. We're literally teaching people things, instilling in them things that are going to play out later on in life.
All right, very good. So let's open it up then. If anybody has a question you want to ask, Pastor Robert, now is your turn. So somebody.
Did you first start off as like a Bible study, or did you invite people to an actual building for a church? How did that first start playing out, maybe in Chile?
In Houston, Las Cruces, what we did is we got there, and before I even moved to Las Cruces, I got a job there. I drove up there one day, got a job, and then Pastor Gallinger helped us look for a building. We ended up finding a building within a couple, but maybe a month or so. When we moved up there, the first thing we started doing is we started working on the building. And, talking to people. In general, we didn't have any converts yet. We were talking to people. We were working on the building. The first building didn't need much work, but we finally opened the doors to the church. The first couple that walked in was a gangster-looking couple, right? They walked in, and we kind of latched on to them, and immediately we began to work with them and working with their family. We would go to their family events, and we began, they would have little things, and we began to witness to their family, and then we started getting foster kids. So I go to the foster homes and talk to the foster parents, and next thing you know, I'm bringing all the foster kids to church. And so I didn't start out with a Bible study. We just kind of started out, latching on to one person and investing ourselves fully in them, and then outreaching and doing everything that we normally do.
Yeah, different pastors have different philosophies about that question that he asked. Ours here, what we do here when we send a couple out is we get a building and have an opening and try to create a forum for visitors to come, and that gets you started. There's exceptions to that. Sometimes it takes a while to get a building. I was talking to Pastor Greg, and I think somebody just set a record. It took 6 or 7 months after a couple had moved into an area to find a building. So if that's the case, we don't want you twiddling your thumbs. You can start witnessing, and if God will open the door and give you some people, you can start a Bible study in your home. But our basic approach is to get a couple in the city, get a building as soon as possible, and have an opening. So that's you'll hear different things in answer to that question from different church planning centers, but that's how we function here.
And if I were to say about finding building, sometimes as a pioneer, I remember when I'm a pioneer, right? And the first we get to Las Cruces, the first thing I want to do is I've been so anxious to get a building and open a building that I'm not really thinking a lot about, as far as is this a good building or not a good building? How much rent is it going? Having patience enough and forethought enough to consider that I was just in a hurry to try to get a building. And I remember finally settling down and saying, you know what, I need to be very, very careful as to what building I move in, because it's got to be something where I'm able to bring people here and people can come and serve God, but I also don't want to spend a fortune. I want to be able to get off support quick, and so those are all things that kind of play in my mind. Yeah.
Did you ever have any services like without any people? And if so, did you ever feel discouraged or like a failure, like maybe I wasn't called for this, doubtful about your calling? And how did you deal with it? If you did, how did you deal with that?
There was never a service I didn't have many people. I had a wife, I had 2 kids. So I always had people to preach to. And I preached to them just like if I was preaching to 100 people or 200 people. I gave myself as far as to preach, to write a sermon, because you never know who's going to walk into the building. And I had service, my kids would, like, why are we starting? There's nobody here, because this is what time church starts. We started on time, we had service, I preached, but yeah, God began to bring people. I think the one time I did struggle a lot with your second question was in Chile. And I struggled more not because of people weren't coming. I knew that you went in, it's a different environment. I struggled more because I felt like, and Pastor will remember, because there's so much money that is being poured into a ministry in a mission field. I mean, I'm in Santiago, Chile. It's not a very cheap city. It's not, rent is not cheap in Chile. Food's not cheap in Chile. It's not one of the, like going to Mexico or places where it's rather inexpensive. And began to play in my mind after 2, 3, 4 years. It began to get to me. It was like, not so much as I wasn't doing the right thing. I just felt like maybe you begin to feel some level of guilt, and it's not God. It's just a personal struggle you begin to go through. And I remember calling Pastor Stevens. He's like, listen, just keep doing what you're doing, and God's going to help you. And when we left, the church we had about 20, 25 people, maybe 30 people, probably a little bit more, but I can't remember. If everybody came, we had about 45 people. But just the way it works. But sometimes we did have services in Chile where we only had 6 people in church, and then you begin to wonder, what am I doing here? But it's a pioneer setting. You don't have 10 churches in the city where you could be established dominion. You're establishing dominion. Well, I think one of the biggest things when you're pioneering, Pastor, and you would know that is that to be honest, dominion is a big issue. And the dominion is established by you, as you go out street preaching, you don't realize how much street preaching establishes certain dominion in your city. You may not see people getting saved in the corner. There's something about what it does to you, to your family, to your church, and to the climate of the city. We would street preach. We began to do just simple things, and establishing that dominion began to help us, and it helped me spiritually and tremendously.
Very good. Somebody else?
Striking the balance as far as family goes. Even here in the church, a lot of times I've heard dads or parents will go ahead and take their kids with them to outreach, which is no problem. I understand that. But when you were out there pioneering the balance between quality and quantity, as far as the time that we found in the time at church, I know you can go out and taking your kids to outreach, and I know it's to them to be able to learn a little bit, but if you can balance that, because you had younger kids, and then also with the wife as well.
I'm going to say that one of the things that helped me greatly is that my wife had convictions too when it came to outreach and prayer. Okay. One of the things that we established on is that we're out there we're going to pioneer. We're not going to go out there and take our kids and have them join soccer leagues, baseball leagues, football leagues, But at the same time, I'm going to make sure that that I remember that I do have a family when I'm pioneering. And so we would take moments to spend time together. We would run off, to a park. We'd run off. When we were in Chile, believe it or not, there were moments where as a dad, I'm always connected to my wife and kids, and I'm always watching them. And I could always tell when they were getting to that point where their homesickness was really getting to them. Believe it or not, even though Chile is a modern city, it's not homesickness begins to play a mind game on you. And so I remember I would really watch my wife and kids, and when I would notice that I would be stashing money away, a little bit of $5, $10 here. And when they started getting homesickness, I'm like, let's go to McDonald's. McDonald's was like American, right? So we go to McDonald's, we'd be sitting there eating hamburger, and they're like, oh, they get excited. And as simple as that sounds, that just being connected with your family, knowing that they're going to go through struggles, and understanding that they're going to go through struggles, you're going to realize the temperature of where they're at, and then spend time with them and just invest with them. And I didn't always do everything right. There were times where, my kids were frustrated, my wife was frustrated. Things are going haywire, and it's because I got so busy, doing other things that I failed to see the warning signs. When they started getting, homesick, or they started, things started going haywire. And I realized if I don't spend time with them, if I don't invest in them, it's not going to, the ship's not going to float very long. So you have to keep a good balance. But we were always, my kids, very good. My wife, always very good. Always. They didn't complain about outreach. They didn't complain about being in church. We had conviction about it, and they were there all the time. We didn't waver from it. We didn't skip out. We were always there. And I think it was a lot because you hate to talk about yourself, but my wife and kids called me. They used to call me Sergeant, right? When I was little, when they were little, my wife and Sergeant. They said, "This guy, you're like a sergeant. Always giving orders, always wanting, it's like, but I had certain convictions about life, but I was never wavering in regards to that. I'm always going to do that. I'm always going to do that. I'm always going to do that. And whether I feel like it or not, I'm always going to do that. And that's the mentality that my wife and I. Yeah.
Pastor, is there a I don't know if you work in Houston or in Las Cruces, but if you're pioneering somewhere, what kind of job do you recommend to look for as far as like schedule wise, and how much pay would you be looking for?
When I was working in Las Cruces, I got a job working from 7 to 3. And I looked for a job to get paid just enough to pay my bills, because I wanted to focus on the church, right? Obviously, if you can get work from 7 to 3, make $100,000 a year. kind of guy, but I was at that time. I got to learn to love plants. You know, I like flowers now. You know, and so I was making just enough money to be able to pay my bills. My focus was pioneering, so I was going to find a job that would not get in the way. And sometimes what we did is there was a point in time where we sold stuff on eBay. In Houston, I don't work on full time, and I've done things here and there just to make a little bit extra cash. But for the most part, I'm debt free, so I just need just enough to pay my bills. And to be honest, it's very little. Somebody asked me, how much do you make a year? And I said, I'm not telling you. To be honest, it's not, it's just what it is, you know. And we've settled, and God blesses us, you know. God provides for us. We have things that I couldn't imagine ever having. And I don't make more money than anybody else. You know, but God's faithful. We just focus on pioneering. That's the method. We just make enough to pioneer. To be able to do what we do.
Pastor, what would you do different as a younger convert? Like when you first came to church, what would you do different in preparation for that? Like, would you have gone to school? Would you have done different?
You know, when I got saved, I was at UTEP. I was going into my sophomore year of UTEP University. I got hit by a car. I lost school. I lost everything. You know, I think the best thing you do is just serve the church. You know, to be honest, be a disciple. Should you develop a trade? I think it's a good idea to have a trade. To know how to do something. I early on liked computers, and then I learned to fix computers, build computers, and ultimately that became my trade. I learned how to fix computers, and that helped me to get the jobs that I got in many cases. I would say, you know, learn to do something like a trade. You don't have to go to college, but at least learn how to do something, work with your hands, something where you can get a job and are able to sustain your family. You know, be an electrician, a plumber, drafting computers, whatever. You know, but obviously you're gonna have to feed your family. You have to learn how to do something, and you can self-educate. I didn't go to finish college with computers. I self-educated myself, and so you know, the idea that you have to go to college and get a degree so that you can provide good, you know, for your family, I think it's a misnomer. You know, I think college is great, but misunderstand me. I think that kids should plan to go to school. But if you're a disciple, get a trade and be a disciple. Yeah.
When you got sent out to Las Cruces for the first time, did you have like a goal to be off sport by this time and to have this many people? Do you have any goals? Or there was any setbacks? How did you do it?
Yeah, you have goals. You know, you set goals, and some are realistic and some unrealistic. Because you know, we're gung ho, we're disciples. We're gonna make it work. And so yeah, we had goals, and ultimately, I call those convictions rather than goals, right? I had certain convictions about, you know, following up, visiting people. You know, I can't tell you how many times, you know, I'd go to bed 2, 3, 4 in the morning, wake up, go to outreach, go to prayer, you know, and it was all because my mindset was I need to get, you know, just enough people to be able to get off support, be able to pay off my rent. But yeah, I did get off support as quickly as I could. I made it a deal to get off support as quickly as I could.
You said something right now. You said, you know, as pioneering, your goal is to get people. So what did you learn while you were out there in Santiago and in Las Cruces? What was the key thing that you apply now in your life to get people, but not only to get them, because it's easy to get them in, you know, as opposed to keeping them. So what was, what one thing did you use to keep, to get them and keep them for long-term core members?
Okay. There's two things. One, You have to understand that it's all about relationship, right? People come because they have a desperate need. They hear the gospel, and God's able to touch and meet that need in their life. But if they're going to make it, if they're going to survive the time, it's going to be largely due to the relationships that they have and your ability to influence them. They have worldly relationships. If you're not spending time with them, you're not investing yourself in them. I'm fishing. I can't tell you how many times I don't know how to fish, and I've never caught a fish. I haven't. I spent 3 years fishing with this one guy. I never caught a fish once. Not once. But listen, you're spending time with people, and you're not being their buddy. You're trying to instill in them the gospel. You're trying to help them, and just being there for them, investing your time in them. And so even now, today, plays a huge part in what we're doing. Even if you have 100, 200 people. You know, Pastor Stevens, I'm a pastor, and I still come to El Paso, and he still will spend time with us. He still, you know, we go out to dinner, and there's still that relationship. And you know, in difficult times like what we're going through today, my family, it's the relationships that keeps you.
Very good question. So the growth that you had in Houston the past couple of years, were there some key things that you could kind of look back and attribute that to and say, well, there were things that I did that caused this growth that you've had in Houston?
You know, when we got to Houston, the church was running about maybe 45, 50 people. And they were stable financially. The church was, you know, we're doing good. Roderick did a good job. We were there. And what we did is we instilled fellowship. My wife and I, that people here would know, my wife and I are real into fellowship, right? Because we believe that we establish people through relationship. And so as we knew people would come into the church, we immediately latch onto them, invite them out to dinner, spend time with them, you know, begin to invest ourselves into them. And that's really what the church has grown, and it's largely due to relationships that we build. And one of the things that you learn to do as a pastor, don't take things personal. Don't take anything personal. You're pastoring. You're a pastor. Your job is to love people, and you know, they say things, they do things. You just love people, right? And as you love people and spend time with them and just instill in them what you've learned through the years, it helps. They get it. They begin to get it. Right.
Pastor, as a new pastor, as a new pioneer, and you're starting to write sermons, how would you discern if it was God speaking or you speaking? How would you discern that?
You don't, you just preach. Because you don't know if it's God or it's you. You hope it's God, right? You pray. I can tell you, I would pray and I read my Bible and I get a thought and I start writing a sermon. I go back to my old sermons that I preached in the back and I'm like, oh my gosh. But I can tell you that I've had people tell me, you don't remember you preached that sermon. I don't remember what I preached, but they still remember it, what I preached. And it really ministered to them. And I do believe God takes what you provide, right? You put together a sermon, you try to get the mind of God, and ultimately God takes over and God's able to speak to people through your mouth as you're faithful to preach. Whether it was you or God, I think God can use that and it uses it to help you.
Amen. Thank you, Robert. And that does trigger a lot of things, and that's very, very good. Ask questions, and we should probably maybe have some serious men's classes where that's all we do, because it does lend itself to be able to minister on what's on your mind. So that really inspired me. Thank you to Pastor Robert and to all of you for being here today. So let's stand. We're going to touch heaven again right now, be in prayer. 9 o'clock, we have a prayer meeting. If you're able to be there for that, that's very important. We call that pastors and leaders prayer meeting. But let's be there if you're able. Let's worship God, give Him praise, and then I'm going to ask if James Thompson would close us in prayer. Father, we thank you.